Professor Yusuf Jakababa, who's originally from Indonesia. He did his PhD at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. He has also been successful in publishing in high-quality international journals in the area of Indonesian history. And Dr. Carol Mitchell, who you also heard from a little bit before, from the Library of Congress.
Can you get this? Should I just take this one?
Oh, that's okay, Carol. I'll bring it.
Okay. Or that one here.
Yeah, maybe that one's a little easier.
Sure. I would like to talk. So you work on education history or just history? Because I'm
So I'm going to take the prerogative as the person who's kind of who introduced everybody, and then a little bit later I'll hand it over to Professor Yusuf Jakababa, who will be the moderator. But I wanted to follow up on Agus's comment about young scholars, and should you start by sending your article to a top journal and then work your way down, or should you start at a middle journal because maybe there's a greater likelihood that you'll get published? And one thing that I've learned over the past 20 plus years now of writing is sometimes it makes sense to start with a relatively easy journal to publish in. So you write, if you have a large research project which is going to result in 5 or 6 or 7 papers, sometimes it's actually a smart thing to publish in a middle journal first, maybe another paper in another middle journal, and what you have then done is you've created a track record of publishing in peer-reviewed journals. So your third paper, when you send it to a top journal, you can actually cite your earlier work that has been published in good journals. Maybe not the best, but in good journals. And that sometimes gives credibility to your authorship when the reviewers are reading. And it also shows a progression in terms of a larger body of research. So thank you for that comment. There are different strategies, and just don't go immediately for the top journal. I'll hand it over now to Professor Jakababa.
Thank you, Professor Siddharth. And yes, this roundtable is about academic publication as it's listed. And I would like to probably begin with some comments about try to put it within an Indonesian context. For the past 3 days during the workshop, our mentors here were talking about the strategy to revise, peer review, and everything with a very high intensity to their participants. But what we have not really talked about, that I find important, that Carol actually touched a little bit today about knowledge production. All of this cannot happen without ideas. What kind of ideas and how we connect and try to develop that ideas into something that can be written and can be published. This is something that I'm also a docent in Indonesian University that I experienced graduate study in the United States, that I found it sometimes the way we Indonesian academic study in the knowledge production is different from what we have in the United States, where knowledge production is already being something part of the culture and people thinking critically and stuff. But here there are some differences that I think it is very important to be brought up. Because ideas have not been brought up, then about the technical writing, then that comes later. But I mean, how we develop this idea, how it comes into being. And I would like to invite from everybody here, I think most of you are docent or graduate student, to express your opinion or what kind of motivation that makes you write. Is it only because to get into the Scopus Index or get additional income from the government, or is it for the sake of the knowledge or for the sake of the field? This is something that I think is important to address. That's and then what kind of challenges that probably we have, because that's only one part of this publication when we have the idea. And then the second part, of course, that we have the mentors here to help about the strategy writing in English, something that we are not the native speaker, and to go into the international settings publication, which is another challenge for us, you know. To bring ideas, this is one challenge that we also have difficulties, but then to make it to a different level, using a language that not our own, that's another challenge. And so we face these double challenges, and how can we find a solution, you know? And then experience from everybody, I think it would be great. I mean, that's the introduction for me for this roundtable. Anyone want to? Thank you. Anyone wants to go ahead? Because this is a roundtable system, and yes.
Thank you. I'm working on a doctoral degree on linguistics. I'm working on this really specific aspect of Indonesian grammar, which I think important for Indonesians, but because the requirement is for international scopus things, and so I wonder how I can put it to international audience, to put the tree into the forest, something like that. So maybe.
Anyone can respond to you.
I'm sorry, can I just ask a little bit for a little bit more information on the dissertation? So you're working on Indonesian grammar, right?
Yes.
Now, is this in relationship to perhaps teaching Indonesian or?
Just find out a specific type of certain writings of the scientific Indonesian.
Okay. Well, then I think in that case it's a fairly straightforward thing to do, because whatever your findings are going to be in Indonesian, these are things that can be compared with other languages. So if you could, so for example, if you're going to try to get an article or several articles, for example, out of your dissertation, then at that point, then what you need to do is to frame the article in such that my findings actually also have relevance to other people who are dealing with the same or similar topic in other languages. That would be the most. And again, there are different ways of writing a paper that way. You get me started on this, I can go for hours, and I'm not going to try to do that here. But that would be the general thing.
Okay, can I answer? Can you hear me? All right. Just 2 points. You mentioned dissertation, right?
Yes.
Okay. See, one of the things that we have found out, and I think August's talk, I thought it was very reassuring, because one of the points he said was that when he looked at the papers of his colleagues, they were data rich. Right? Your dissertation is data rich, but it doesn't mean that you should put all this data in an article. Because one of the things that we have seen, at least when we have worked in these workshops, is that people are trying to put too much information in that piece. So often we come out and say, shed off some of the data so you have a more focused article. In fact, some papers that were submitted to us have possibilities for more than one article. So in other words, if you have a lot of data, it doesn't mean that you have to put them all in one article. Perhaps you can look at the possibility of maybe talking about your other data in another piece. Because a dissertation has a lot of data. An article focuses on one research question, which may be one of the questions in your dissertation.
So there's actually a concept, and I'm being a little bit sarcastic here also. It's called the least publishable unit, the LPU, right? So if you have a dissertation, you can try to publish the whole dissertation as one article. At the end of the day, your resume will have only one line in it, okay? But if you start dividing it up into different focused pieces, maybe you get 3 or 4 or 5 publications, and if those come out over 3 or 4 or 5 years, then you get everybody who's evaluating your work happy for 3 or 4 or 5 years, not for just one. So there is, I think there's a pragmatic angle as well. Yeah. It also helps to divide things up, because if you publish one paper in one journal and another related paper in a totally different journal, each article is kind of like a billboard, like an advertising board. You're telling people, this is the work that I'm doing, this is the knowledge I'm producing. If you only have one advertisement on one highway, only the people who go down that highway are going to see it. But if you have two and you cross-cite your articles, then you're telling people, look, you're telling more people, you've got more coverage, right? So some of this is about marketing and getting your knowledge out for people to see. On creativity, my observation, Yusuf, has been there are actually at least two different ways that people come up with new ideas. One is they read the literature and they read it and they read it and they read it and they try to find out what are the gaps and then they try to fill the gaps. That's one way to do it. The positive aspect of that is because you've read the whole literature and you found a gap, when you fill that gap, you will be referring to the literature that you read. So all the people who wrote in that literature will probably be interested in what you are doing. So that's a positive thing. The negative thing is if you read everybody else's work first and then find a gap, then in some sense the potential for originality is reduced because you have put yourself into the same track as everybody else and you're making just a small move. So that's one way to be creative. It has its positive and negative sides. The other way to be creative is to not read the literature, is to just come up with the idea first, right? And then once you've come up with the idea and thought about it and put it down on paper, then start looking at the literature and see how it connects to the literature. The positive side of that is you are likely to have more creative ideas if you do that, because you're not being constrained by work that other people have done. The negative side is making the connections with the work that other people have done maybe a little bit harder.
Okay, I'm not disagreeing with what he has to say, but you have two extremes. And so he's saying don't do your entire dissertation in one publication. Fair enough. But then publishers talk about salami publishing. Now, salami is a sausage. And you go to the supermarket and they cut it very, very thin. And some articles come in and you see somebody's trying to get too many articles out of their dissertation. So you need a balance. Anyway, I gave an example, your other question about how do you take some specific thing that you're working on and get a larger audience. So with apologies for the people who heard this in my talk in the workshop. About 4 or 5 years ago, I was doing a workshop for UI. And somebody at that workshop was doing research in a Sundanese village. And he was looking at what happens when a child who has grown up in a family that's Sundanese speaking enters school and is now being taught in Bahasa Indonesia. So there are two ways you can do this. One is that you focus on that village. And how many people are going to be interested in that village? 2 or 3? So the case study will not attract very many readers. So you want to just stand this over on its head. And you say, here we have a case of a child whose home language is one language and whose school language is another. That's what you want to write about because there are many other cases like that. And then you use your information about that particular village as a case study. But if you write it about the case of the 2 languages, that happens all over the place. A lot of kids are in that situation. And then you've made your audience much bigger. So you're looking for the general point, and then your data will give an example of that general point.
Thank you for the comments. Carol or Marcus, do you want to say something?
Well, he did say something. What he earlier in his talk, it's his forest and the trees. You have lots of trees, so now, and it's used. And Dr. Tanva say, which way do you go with your citations? It's having a good body of literature that connects it to the outside world. And one of the things I think what you said was useful too is, and my little rant on your being a walking bibliophile and knowing your citations. I thought was interesting that he said things are really old in citations. You want your citations and your reading to be both current, but you don't want to forget about the past. So you really do need to read. I mean, so the MBRS, you have to cite the Journal of Malaysian Studies if you're doing something on Malay history, even if it's 100 years old. And the same with the linguistic. There are linguistic things that are still relevant today that were published 50 years, particularly in Indonesia. Some of the best work was coming out 30, 40, 50 years ago. But you do need your new citations as well. So I liked your forest and trees. I think that's a very good analogy. You know, you've got the trees, now you have to build the forest.
Thank you, Carol. Yeah, let us continue the discussion now. Again, coming back to the comments from the mentors of the professors here. Challenges. Yeah. We sometimes too much focus on our trees. We are borrowing Pago's analogy. And then how can we reach more to the forest in the sense that among our colleagues, because from my experience too, sometimes we just tend to work on our own. While as we know, the journal process, application, submission, then there's a peer review. So there's a community, meaning there's a community. This is something that, I mean, I personally find lacking in the sense of academic community that we have in Indonesia, something that people want to share their ideas in a sense. But they do share in within the context of seminars, but about like informal discussion, things like that. I want to know the opinions of everyone here. Like, how can we have more stimulating, discussion on the field or the knowledge? Again, he's talking about production of knowledge. As you already mentioned about the two ways how to get these ideas, but I want to bring it back again to the generation context, like the difficulty and also challenges that we're having. Anyway.
I have a question. Is one of the difficulties because people have to have multiple jobs and multiple roles, so time is just the limit? I mean, people used to say at the University of the Philippines, you moonlighted there because you had to work so many other jobs to make your life work. Is that a problem here?
Well, didn't really need an answer for that.
I mean, I think it's a, how do we work around that?
That's actually for students, no. They have only one job here. They're studying, I mean.
Okay.
Writing the thesis, right? But for university staffs, then yes, definitely we have to handle so many things. But that should not be an excuse for anybody, right? So the problem is then, well, how to have your own time to get started in writing, and then to get, writing is not a one-night time process. It's a really a long-time process. So when you never start, you never end, right? And then I think the most important thing is that, well, we cannot avoid the so many responsibilities that we have to handle. We really personally, each of us really has to provide our own time and how to set our own atmosphere and how to get started. And then, so, answer to your question is yes.
But how, in what context do you do that? If you're all busy, and how do you set aside that in a university setting?
I cannot answer that question. Anyone have suggestions here? Best way would have to have sabbatical leave. But it's very, very ideal, But yeah, but if you could suggest, maybe policy
do you have brown bags and do you have seminars?
Yes, we have brown bag seminar here, and this is very regular. And normally people will just get, involved in the activities. But to end up with an article ready to publish is something else, right? And then yes. So what we have done here is to have regular, workshop on writing, publications, and also mentoring. And of course, we are very grateful to you all to be here for this days, and it's really helpful for us. And we would like to have this kind of opportunity much more in the future. I think also this is one of the ways to have it.
I was wondering, well, what I've heard so far is, I mean, like here at Kadimata, that, okay, there are brown bags where possibly people could discuss their writing, one person could present their writing and then get reactions from other people. There are workshops and so forth and so on. But once you get into a brown bag or a seminar or a workshop, I'd like to throw this out to the audience now. Like, what happens in those things? And in particular, I would like to target, if I may, the people who just finished our seminar. Because, okay, you came to our seminar, we put you into groups. You started talking about your writing. What happened? How did you do that exactly? If you could reflect on that. So I think I would start with the people who were just in the workshop, and I'm hoping what that will do then is for those of you who didn't attend the workshop, that when you've had experiences in talking about your writing, perhaps with just a friend, just maybe one-on-one, or maybe with a small group of people, how do you actually get into actually talking about the writing without really offending people, but at the same time providing, pointed advice that was really going to help them to proceed. So I'm going to stop right there, and I'm going to hope that the people who just finished the workshop will raise their hands and jump up and say something.
Actually, we have a small group of people who can share our research results with, but it seems also that we have like psychological barriers that prevent us from doing that. So, for example, I will not trust my colleagues to read my research paper because I feel ashamed of my weaknesses and my probably. So I think building trust is very important, and if we can build a trust, then everything will run smoothly. And this is, I think, the not biggest, but big problem, I think, among us, the colleagues. So for example, if I want to turn my paper to Pak Agus, I feel, oh my God, I might not be.
No, that's true.
Yeah, and sometimes you have, like a good partner, but we do not really have time that we can work together. Maybe because of we have different activities and so on, and giving comments to other works might take much of our time.
Can I throw the question back to you now? But we threw you into just random groups. It's like going into the deep end, really. Very dangerous situation in a sense. And yet you guys very, very quickly overcame, you somehow formed trust communities quite quickly. And I'm really, I was kind of sitting there watching this and saying, geez, these guys get together awful fast. They really trust each other more than I would probably trust anybody that fast. How did you do it?
Maybe it's strange. Between strangers, we feel confident.
Okay.
I don't know Paul very much. I mean, we have a very short encounter, and I don't think my face will when we look at my weaknesses and so on. So, but I think it will be more effective when we work together with our colleagues. So the problem is how we take away the psychological barrier. So if we meet often, perhaps slowly we can build that trust. But because so far we don't meet each other very often for that purpose. Every day we meet, but we discuss things that are not related to.
Can I just interject at this point? I think, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, I think that point of trust is very important, especially in a culture like this. And I mean, this is just an idea that came to me right now. Where we used to work, we had a publication called Working Papers. which was a publication just within our department. And everyone knew that it was not a paper that was ready for publication, but they needed to get it out to people who would, because it was called the Center for English Language Communication. So we were all in the same field. But putting together, what I'm thinking is putting together your work, your drafts at this stage, and everybody knows because you're colleagues. So we knew each other, and we had something to work with. And we were sort of familiar with the field because we were all in the same department. If that could be done, then you could carry it to the next stage and discuss it within that department. I mean, there's the how do you call this? The threat is not so strong because everybody knows it's a working paper. It's called, because we're called working papers. Do you think that would work? Because you see, the thing is, when you're writing a paper by yourself, it's very hard to discuss it with somebody, right? I mean, somebody said writing is a very lonely activity, but it does help when you're able to discuss your ideas with somebody who may have some knowledge of what you're doing and who's more sympathetic because he or she has been in the same position. I think the people in this workshop were able to do that because they were all in the same position, for one thing. And they knew they were expected to be able to articulate what their comments were, what their problems were, what their ideas were.
I just want to pass along a true story. First time I came to Indonesia, I was meeting with a man who had been our Indonesian instructor when I was in university. He had a 10-year-old daughter. Talking to that girl was like talking to somebody who was 25. And so at one point I said to her, this is a little bit odd. Here you're just 10 years old, and you talk so maturely. And she looked me in the eye and said, this is a lesson for life, right? She looked me in the eye and said, Orang malu, rugi. And I think that applies to all of the things we're talking about. I mean, you can hold back and you lose all the benefit that you might get by talking to people.
Just going back to something Susan's saying, and this will connect a little bit to what Paul was doing. Susan mentioned working papers. I was the editor of working papers in my department for 9 years. So what would happen is, before that paper was actually put out, I would work quite extensively with the writers, who were publishing things to kind of shape, to kind of get that paper into shape. So I mean, I would work with them to get the paper in shape before we put it out to the department. And then, of course, we would, in some cases, have meetings over those papers as well. To be quite honest, that didn't work out so well because some of the people in the departments had rather large heads and were very, very opinionated, and oftentimes they were more interested in putting out their own opinions on the content than they were really with helping the writers. I think that was one of the things that really helped me kind of almost shape these kinds of writing workshops that we do. That you got to get the right group of people together. So that becomes important. But I think it can be done. I think now, if I were, because I'm a little older and everything, a little bit braver, I would probably make sure that the people with the big heads didn't say too much, and just told them to be quiet. But at that time, I was a young academic, so what can I say? Okay, but yeah, I think it would be interesting to just talk about maybe what could be done at the departmental level for people to be able to talk about their writing and to get feedback on that. I'd just like to hear some ideas on that if you got any. Yeah.
Razina, do you want to say something?
Just a couple. So one is about having these conversations, and sometimes I found, so those of us who do work in history, often we don't have the opportunity to have conversations with the people we would like to, because a lot of them wrote their work 100 years ago or 50 years ago. But I think it's still possible to write a paper in history as if you are having a conversation with somebody. And sometimes you don't need people in the room to have a conversation. You can write in such a way that it's a back and forth between you and 2 or 3 or 4 scholars who are long gone, but perhaps who said something that provoked some curiosity and some ideas. And I also wanted to come back to the point that, Carol, that you made earlier about time, and that Bagus, I think, very rightly responded to. You know, 1 in 10 papers gets accepted to the Journal of Asian Studies, okay? So these are not, you know, publishing in good journals is not an easy thing to do. It takes a lot of time. For those of you who were in the workshop when we talked about taking a paper and revising it again and again and again, maybe 10 or 15 times, that's what it takes to get a paper up to the quality that it's going to get published in a very good journal. Now, what does this mean in terms of time? It means that doing good research is an extremely time-consuming process. Okay? So if you, for those of you who are planning to go into careers in research, my advice is go into a career in research if you love to do research. If you do not love to do research, you know, if you think that this is going to be a 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. job, 5 days a week, and then you can go home and forget about everything, that's not the way it works. This job is 24/7, 365. If you get an idea at midnight on Thursday, and you have to teach a class the next day at 8 a.m., you know, you need to write that idea down before it goes away, especially when you reach the age I am. Okay. So this has to be a labor of love. It has to be something that you wake up in the morning saying, you know, I'm just waiting to write that next bit. Okay, I have to go and teach a class, I'll teach it, and then the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write that next bit. Okay? Your time is extremely valuable. I think most of us who pursue research and love to do research feel very strongly that we just do not have enough time because we have so many other responsibilities, right? We have family. I take my daughters to learn violin on Saturdays. Their lessons are 2 hours long. What do I do in the 2 hours that they're learning their violin? I go to the nearest cafe, I open up my laptop, and I'm writing a paper or I'm analyzing some data. Okay? So research is something that stays with you all the time. Your mind is working on it all the time, consciously or unconsciously. You have to be prepared at any time to seize the opportunity, to capture the ideas that your mind is producing and put them down into paper. And that means 24/7, 365.
There's something called Parkinson's Law. And if you haven't heard of it, Parkinson's Law says that work will expand to fill the amount of time available. And I find I send papers out for referees' reports. If I tell them I need it in 1 week, I'll get it in 1 week. If I tell them I have 2 weeks, I'll get it in 2 weeks. If I tell them 1 month, it'll take a month. Everybody right now would probably tell me their time is completely filled. And yet, if you're going to write, then if your time is full, you can't write. You have no time. The only way you're going to write is set aside some time. And you'll discover that actually the work you're doing now will be squeezed a little bit into the time, and you'll then have that time. In the 1990s, I wrote a book. I got up at 6 a.m. and I worked until about 8:30 when my son came in and said, it's time to spin tops. And so we spin tops together, and I take him to school. But if you set aside some time, and some people are good in the morning, some people are good in the evening. One thing you have to discover about yourself is what works for you. And it won't necessarily be the same thing as for other people. But you set aside some time, and then you fill that time with your research and writing. And you'll discover, sure, I can actually do that, even though I seemed so busy before. But yeah, there's a bit more time. I can set aside and just say, this is only for that purpose. And then the other things you do, well, they'll still go on. It does work.
So Paul, you raised a really important issue of time management. Okay? When you're doing research, time management is absolutely critical. And I'm sure Agus will attest to this too, because he's in a position where he has to do research, but he's also an administrator. If you are, and I direct a center too, so I'm an administrator too. If you are an administrator, it's amazing how quickly and easily your time gets eaten up in your administrative responsibilities. And so I'm sure you have developed strategies, Agus. I certainly have. I'll just share one or two to give you an idea about what you can do to try to remain research productive. One of the rules that I have for managing I manage my time with a calendar. I'm really rigorous with the calendar. And one of the things I've told my secretary in my office, I said, by 5 p.m. at the end of the day, if there is a blank spot in my calendar tomorrow, I'm not going to be in the office. I'm just not going to show up. If there are appointments, I will be there. But if there are no appointments, I'm not there because I'm now taking that time back to start writing my research. The second thing is, if you have different responsibilities, if you have to drop your kids off, if you have to, write a budget, if you have to, call somebody, try to put all of those things together into one block of time, maybe 2 or 3 hours. And that will free up large blocks of time, because good research does not happen in increments of half an hour or 1 hour. You need 3 hours, you need 4 hours, sometimes you need 2 days. So try to block all your other responsibilities into solid blocks of time, to open up other solid blocks of time just so that you can think it right.
Okay, does anyone want to share a good strategy? Go ahead.
Thank you. If we look the authors of some journal, they are usually affiliated to the sub-institution. Usually Indonesia is universities. So this kind of condition sometimes makes the beginner, especially newcomer, who wants to write or who wants to submit to the journal, becomes not confident, because they don't have any affiliation, because they just have graduated from his master or PhD.
Yeah, well, first of all, the point was made during the workshop. The journal articles are sent out for double-blind review, which means that the referee doesn't know who the author is, and the author doesn't know who the referee is. So the referee has no idea whether you're a senior professor or a junior scholar just getting a PhD. And the decision for that really needs to be based on the content of the piece and not on who you are. And then the second thing is, when you're sending something to a journal, the editor wants to know, why should we listen to you? And why we should listen to you is not because you're a senior person, but because you've done research on that topic. Years ago, when I was in graduate school, the Journal of Modern History was published where I was a student. And the editor was complaining one day and said, we get papers from very senior big names who seem to think because they are a senior big name, we should publish it. But some of them are terrible papers, and we reject it. And they write back and say, but I am senior big name, and why aren't you publishing me? It's not the way it works. You publish based on the paper. And if somebody is not qualified to write it, that will come out in the paper, we'll see. But if you have studied something and you have something to say, you should be able to get it published.
Anyone else want to share a strategy? She mentioned about 24/7, 365 is very challenging as far as researcher. Want to say something?
Oh yeah.
Yes,
sometimes I think as a researcher, we need some technical support. Maybe it refers to the latest technique, like data analysis or something else. But we cannot get from our study, regular study. How can we solve those?
Somebody at yours. I take it because I do quantitative research. So the world of are you referring to quantitative methods?
Yeah.
Okay, so the world of quantitative research is a very large world. Every discipline has its own quantitative culture. So economics has econometrics, psychology has psychometrics, epidemiology has biostatistics. So different types of statisticians do statistics in different ways, and they prefer different methods. if you look at papers that are being written in the quantitative disciplines now, they almost never have only one author. They almost always have 2, 3, 4 authors. Why? Because these disciplines have now become so specialized that you will have an expert in the subject area, but that expert feels like they are not completely at the cutting edge of the techniques. So what do? They either, when they go to a conference, they find somebody, they make friends with that person and say, hey, you know how to do this? Would you be willing to work with me to help with the data analysis? Or they go onto the internet and they find somebody who's doing work in the area and they send, and maybe they try to find out some way that they are connected to them, and they pick up the phone and they call and say, would you be willing to work with me, or send an email. So my response to your question is, I think what you're asking is, or what you're saying is, I need to find a collaborator who has the technical expertise, who can help with the analysis. I'm going to focus on the questions and tell them what questions we need to ask. They can do the analysis, we will write the paper together, and then hopefully it will get published.
Thank you. Doesn't UGM have a social science? Isn't there a social science data cruncher here on campus?
Social science data what?
Cruncher, a big data. Don't you have a data or a social science that's getting into analysis? I don't know. There is interest in, I'm going to plug libraries right now. In the US, there is a movement that research libraries realize they needed data librarians. So they're now being, they used to be kind of separate and a highly specialized thing, but now they're actually creating jobs for data librarians who know how to use the statistical analysis tools simply. I mean, there's different levels. These would be, you know, that if you know what you want and you can run some of these tools and they can help you pick out some of them at the level that some of us work at. At his level, he meets those friends. but I think this is another plug in which, you know, I think this is an area where Indonesians, I've seen at the Badan Statistik, I think they have people there that are helpful. I'm not sure, but I've been in there and you can set up appointments at the Badan Statistik in Jakarta.
Actually, at a university like UGM, chances are if you look in the right department, you'll find people who are very well qualified to assist you with the technical aspects.
There's a group here that's...
You know, there are a lot of good scholars in the top Indonesian universities now who have the training to do research that is as technically sophisticated as you find anywhere in the world. So I would recommend, are you based at UGM?
Yes.
Look around. There's somebody here who can help.
Yeah, there's a private one that works up with like the big analytic things like RTI and some of these. I know it's here, I just can't remember the name of it. It's a semi-private or something like that here.
Because I realized that qualitative research is not so popular these days. I mean, simple qualitative analysis, we need to combine quantitative and qualitative so that the result is more convincing.
That depends on your discipline. So what discipline are you in?
Yeah.
What is your discipline?
My discipline is linguistics, especially phonology and phonetics.
Yes. Linguistics is becoming, a branch of it is becoming increasingly quantitative. But if you had said that your discipline is, let's say, well, even poetry now, even literature, people are doing quantitative analysis with meter and other types of things. So yeah.
Well, besides data analysis, we also need techniques collecting data, such as text mining. Yeah, all those require other techniques beyond our regular study.
Okay, do you want me else? This is a challenge for all of us to, if we choose this path as a, yes?
Okay, my name is Reviran Rozak, and I'm now working on my dissertation on business. And as a part of my final assignments in accomplishing my S3 or doctoral degree, we should at least publish one international index Scopus journal as the requirements in the finals examination in the end. But what I encountered is my topic is still very rare. It is quite novel in Indonesian context, and I have got several related differences in Southeast Asia, in US, and also in New Zealand. I'm so sorry to say when I'm trying to discuss this rare topic, this topic is quite novel, and my promoters are really interested with my topic. But the problem is when we are trying to write all together the papers, because we should make collaborative or authorship in writing our international journals. It means that I will be the first author, and then the promoters will be the second, the third authors, right? But the problem is when we are writing our papers, sometimes the promoters are not really, not really knows about the recent updated references about this topic. Once I participate international conference in China, and I met with the people whose expertise is in my area, and we talk a lot with my topic, and he provided me so many references about my topics, and yes, it is true that we should get some collaborations with the persons, with the experts who are the topics maybe is similar to us now. This is my experience.
Okay. I think thank you for sharing the experience. And I think we already reached the end of the time. Because we have to end it at 4:15, and I already see Ibu Dekan is already here for the signing of the MOA. Let's give a round of applause for everybody who's participated. Thank you for the mentor, Rafida, Susan, Paul, Paul Tosca, Pak Agus, and Bugano. Thank you.